Long before Rome feared her name, before senators whispered about her influence, before generals crossed seas to stand inside her chambers, Cleopatra VII Philopator learned something far more valuable than power. She learned survival. She was born into a dynasty that wore gold in public and hid knives in private. Inside the royal courts of Ptolemaic Kingdom, children were not raised like children. They were raised like possible threats. Brothers could become rivals. Sisters could become political tools. Mothers could disappear. Advisors could change loyalty overnight. And every smile inside the palace carried a second meaning. By the time Cleopatra was old enough to read, she had already seen something most rulers never witnessed until adulthood. Fear. Not fear on battlefields. Not fear in cities. Fear inside the palace itself. She watched servants whisper when certain names were mentioned. She watched priests suddenly change alliances. She watched foreign envoys smile at her father in public, then laugh at him in private. And slowly, without anyone formally teaching her, Cleopatra began understanding the first rule of survival. Power does not belong to the strongest. Power belongs to the one who sees danger first. Unlike many rulers who inherited obedience, Cleopatra inherited instability. Her father, Ptolemy XII elites, ruled under constant pressure, from debt, from Rome, from internal rivals, and from a court that often saw weakness as opportunity. To protect his throne, he relied on Roman influence. To keep his bloodline alive, he taught his children something no royal tutor ever openly admitted: trust. No one. Cleopatra listened, and unlike her siblings, she learned. She studied languages, not one or two, but many: Greek, Egyptian, diplomatic tongues used by merchants, soldiers, priests, and foreign courts. She learned to speak to different men in different ways, to make scholars feel respected, soldiers feel valued, priests feel heard, and rivals feel underestimated. By her teenage years, the palace had already stopped seeing her as a child. Some saw beauty, some saw intelligence, but the ones who truly understood politics saw danger, because Cleopatra was learning something few women in the ancient world were ever allowed to master: not how to follow power, but how to become it. And in the years to come, Rome would learn that lesson the hard way. By the time Cleopatra VII Philopator reached adulthood, she already understood something most rulers learn far too late. The most dangerous enemies are rarely outside the palace. They sleep inside it. When her father, Ptolemy XII elites, died, Egypt did not enter a period of peace. It entered a succession crisis. According to dynastic tradition, Cleopatra was expected to rule alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII Philopator, a child in age, but not in political value. On paper, the arrangement looked stable. A royal brother, a royal sister, shared blood, shared throne, shared destiny. But inside the palace, no throne is ever shared. At first, Cleopatra moved carefully. She signed decrees, met priests, spoke with merchants, strengthened relationships with military officers. She understood something her brother did not. Egypt was not ruled only by crowns. It was ruled by perception, and perception can become power faster than armies. Within months, her face began appearing alone on official documents. Her name appeared before her brother's. Priests spoke of her intelligence. Traders praised her diplomacy. Even common Egyptians, who rarely felt connected to the Greek rulers of the Ptolemaic court, began noticing something unusual. Cleopatra spoke their language. Not Greek, Egyptian. something almost none of her ancestors had bothered to do. And suddenly, she was no longer just another ruler. She was becoming something far more dangerous. She was becoming popular. Inside the palace, that changed everything. Her brother's advisors noticed first. Men who had spent their lives manipulating weak kings now saw something deeply unsettling. A young queen, who was not easy to control. Meetings began happening without her. Military commanders changed loyalty. Treasury officials stopped reporting directly. Servants who once smiled stopped speaking. And one morning, Cleopatra walked into the royal council chamber and realized no one stood when she entered. She understood immediately. The coup had already begun. Within weeks, armed guards loyal to her brother controlled palace entrances. Her allies disappeared. Some fled. Some were arrested. Some simply stopped being seen. And Cleopatra was forced out of her own kingdom. But exile did not break her. It educated her. Because somewhere beyond Egypt's borders, with only a handful of loyal followers, Cleopatra stopped thinking like a queen trying to survive, and started thinking like a predator preparing to return. Exile changes people. For some, it creates fear. For others, it creates clarity. By the time Cleopatra VII Philopator had established a temporary camp near Egypt's eastern frontier, she had already accepted one brutal truth. No Egyptian army was coming to save her. No priests would risk their influence for her. No old allies would openly challenge the palace in Alexandria. If she wanted her throne back, she would need something stronger than loyalty. She would need Rome. And at that exact moment, Rome itself was bleeding. Across the Mediterranean, civil war had shattered alliances and divided legions. Senators changed sides overnight. Provinces waited to see who would survive. Armies marched under competing banners. And at the center of that chaos stood one man, Julius Caesar. Brilliant, ruthless, deeply in debt, and more dangerous than any king Cleopatra had ever studied. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, he did not come as a conqueror. He came as an arbiter. Officially, Rome had been asked to settle the dispute between Cleopatra and her brother, Ptolemy XIII Philopator. Unofficially, everyone knew something else. Whoever gained Caesar would gain Egypt, and Cleopatra understood that faster than anyone. But there was one problem. She was banned from the city. Her brother's men controlled the roads. The harbors were watched. The palace gates were guarded. Her name alone could get her captured before she reached the walls. Which meant if Cleopatra wanted to meet Rome's most powerful man, she would have to disappear first. Ancient accounts describe what happened next with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Under cover of darkness, with only a handful of trusted followers, Cleopatra approached Alexandria by boat. No royal banners, no soldiers, no ceremony, only silence, and one impossible plan. Wrapped inside cloth, some say carpet, some say bedding, some say linen meant for royal chambers, Cleopatra allowed herself to be smuggled directly into the palace itself. Past guards, past servants, past spies, past men actively searching for her, and somewhere deep inside the palace, the bundle was placed before Caesar. The Roman general watched as the cloth slowly opened, and from inside, the exiled queen of Egypt stood up, alive, smiling, and completely unafraid. In that moment, Caesar was not looking at a refugee. He was looking at something far more dangerous. A ruler who understood theatre and Rome would never fully recover from that night. By the morning after that impossible meeting, the balance of power inside Alexandria had already begun to shift. Men who had spent their entire lives studying armies, tax systems, trade routes, and political alliances suddenly found themselves studying something else. Her. Because when Cleopatra VII Philopator stood before Julius Caesar, she did not behave like an exiled queen begging for protection. She did not speak like a daughter seeking revenge. And she certainly did not present herself as someone waiting to be rescued. She presented herself as a solution. And powerful men often trust solutions more than emotions. Caesar noticed it immediately. Unlike many rulers he had encountered, Cleopatra never rushed to impress him. She never wasted words. She listened longer than most senators. She asked questions that revealed more than they appeared to ask. She studied which Roman officers interrupted conversations, which advisers spoke too confidently, which soldiers entered without permission, which servants moved when Caesar was angry. She wasn't studying the man. She was studying the system, and systems can be controlled once they are understood. Within weeks, meetings that once happened without her began happening around her. Treasury discussions, naval strategy, grain shipments, diplomatic correspondence. Egypt's civil war was no longer being discussed as a family dispute. It was becoming Roman strategy, and Cleopatra was shaping it. Inside Alexandria, rumors spread faster than orders. Some called her manipulative. Some called her dangerous. Some whispered that Caesar had fallen under her spell. But men often describe intelligence as seduction when they don't understand it. The truth was more unsettling. Cleopatra did not need Caesar to love her. She needed him to believe that Egypt was safer with her than without her. And she was right. As Caesar's forces confronted supporters of Ptolemy XIII Philopator, the city became a battlefield. Streets filled with smoke. Ships burned in the harbor. Grain warehouses collapsed into fire. And inside the palace, while generals argued over tactics, Cleopatra remained calm, because she understood something warriors often forget. Battles decide who survives today. Narratives decide who rules tomorrow. And slowly, Rome stopped seeing her as Egypt's queen. It started seeing her as part of its future. When the smoke of Alexandria finally began to clear, Egypt had not simply survived. It had changed. And so had Rome. Because by the time Cleopatra VII Philopator reclaimed her throne, she was no longer just a queen fighting for survival. She was now connected to the most powerful political machine on earth, and that made her more dangerous than any army. In the years that followed, Cleopatra would sail the Nile with Caesar, appear beside Roman authority, and eventually give birth to a son whose existence alone threatened centuries of political tradition. A child carrying both Egyptian royalty and Roman ambition. For many inside Rome, that was not romance. That was strategy. Senators began whispering. Old families grew nervous. Priests watched carefully. Military leaders who once feared rival generals now feared something harder to fight. A future. Because if Caesar openly recognized a dynastic heir linked to Egypt, Rome itself could change forever. And Rome hated uncertainty. When assassination of Julius Caesar shook the empire, Cleopatra understood immediately what many others did not. Caesar was dead, but the game was not. She returned to Egypt not as a grieving ally, but as something far more dangerous. A ruler who now understood Rome from the inside, its ambitions, its vanity, its greed, its weaknesses. And in time, another Roman would enter her world. Mark Antony, another general, another empire maker, another man convinced he was in control. And once again, Cleopatra would prove something Rome never fully accepted. She was never dangerous because of beauty. She was dangerous because she understood power before powerful men realized they were losing it. So when history asks who Cleopatra really was, a queen, a lover, a symbol, perhaps, but the truth may be far darker. She was a woman born into a collapsing dynasty, who learned how to make empires fight for her survival.